Okay, well, we might make a start. It looks like we're still waiting on a few people, but I will hand over shortly to Paula from the English Language Centre, who's going to run this session for us. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Roger Rakovich. I'm the Manager of Student Success and Engagement in the Faculty of the Professions. Our session today is being recorded, so if anybody does not want it recorded, please let me know and I'll arrange for that not to be uploaded, I guess, because I think it's on an automatic record, which may be beyond my technical capabilities to stop at the minute. The session today is, as the slide suggests, really around teaching EAL students and offering that support in the classroom, helping facilitate those conversations, getting students a little bit more actively involved in their learning. One thing that we won't be focusing on today, I guess, is around English language requirements for admissions and these sorts of things, but we do recognise the role that they do have to play within teaching. Just quickly as well, there is a range of things that we do offer to commencing students, most of which are under the English Assist program, including the communication skills tutorials that we run within the faculty. So I've just put that web link up there for everyone. And of course, there's other programs throughout the university, including the Writing Centre, the online feedback service, Talking with Aussies, a host of other programs for commencing and continuing international students as well. So without any further delay, I'll hand over to Paula.
Thanks, Roger. And hi, everyone. So we've got David, Natalia and Amy. Natalia, you put your camera on very briefly at the beginning. Thank you. For David and Amy, if you'd like to put your camera on, that'd be great. I'd like to see it. Otherwise, if you can't. Oh, that's nice. Hi, David. How are you? Hi, Amy. How are you? I'm assuming, do you all know each other? That's an assumption of mine. You do? No? Yes?
I don't. I know Natalia.
Hi, David. Good to see you.
I'm not sure I know anyone else.
Okay.
I'm from the law school.
Okay. Well, welcome. We'll have some opportunities within the session today to exchange some ideas and views, so you'll get to know each other then. So welcome to the session on teaching and supporting EAL students in the classroom. Just to double check, can everyone see the PowerPoint that I'm sharing? It's all good, and everyone can hear me clearly as well. Excellent. Okay, so my name's Paula, and I look forward to spending the next hour or so with you discussing this topic. So as a brief, as a brief background to our role at the English Language Centre, or the ELC, we work with international students, international English as additional language or EAL students in pre and post entry programs, and we support the development of their language and communication skills, as well as their understanding and developing their awareness of the academic norms and expectations within our environment at the University of Adelaide. We also work with the School of Education, and we run some electives within the Masters of Education there that relate to English language teaching and intercultural competence as well. So as language educators, we understand and we've assisted firsthand with both the linguistic and cultural challenges that our EAL students might have when they come to study in the university or this tertiary environment. So let's have a look at what we'll cover today. So we'll start by taking a closer look at what EAL is, and then we'll move on to see how we can facilitate understanding of input or content, and more specifically, how we can use certain principles to support our EAL students, particularly in relation to written and spoken input. Today we'll be focusing on. And then we'll move on to various aspects of facilitating group discussions and promoting participation within tutorials, within lectures and within their classes, as well as some ways to help them gain confidence in this participation. And within this, we will look at the role that culture plays potentially within this participation or non-participation. And then finally, we will discuss some ways that we can demonstrate the intercultural capital value that our students, our EAL students, bring to our classes, they bring to our courses and to our programs. So let's start off by taking a look at what we mean by EAL. So EAL stands for English as an Additional Language. And EAL students are those for whom their home language is a language or dialect other than English. So I guess it's important to note here that not all international students are EAL students. So some international students come from countries or cultures where English is their first language. And domestic students can also identify as EAL if they've grown up in a household that, for example, primarily speaks another language. So I'd like to start off with you now taking some time to reflect on your programs and courses. Considering the EAL students that you have in your classes, what do you think are their greatest challenges, and what strategies do you currently use to support the students, these students in your classes? And also considering the non-EAL students in your course in general, how do these benefit from the inclusion of both our international and EAL students? So a couple of questions there to get you thinking about the topic. I will put you into breakout rooms. So I'll do to you what we do to our students. And I'll put the questions, if you can just take a note of those questions, because the screen share doesn't follow you into the breakout rooms, that would be great.
Can you just copy paste those questions into the chat?
I'll pop it into the chat, and I'll also put it into the announcement for the discussion for the breakout room, so you'll be able to see them in both ways.
Thank you.
Sorry. Interesting. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. Because I didn't set up the meeting, I don't seem to have the option for breakout rooms. Do you happen to have that, Roger?
I don't, I'm afraid, because it's sort of on autopilot from Caitlin the whole meeting.
Yeah,
but,
that's okay.
I was as a host, so.
I am conscious, as we only have, excluding yourself, Paul, of the 4 teaching academics.
Yeah, I think we can just we'll just do it as is, if that's okay with everyone. So the questions are there. I'll just start the sharing again. So if anyone wants to jump in and start the discussion on those, possibly, you know, identifying those EAL students, what do you find are the greatest challenges?
I found, for me, and I'm still new to teaching in the university environment. I've taught in corporate and vocational education before. I find that they're quite shy in terms of wanting to share. When you get them more one-on-one, they'll open up. And I don't want to generalize, but from some of the conversations, a lot of them, they feel like when they're trying to speak English, they feel like they don't sound as smart as they would in their native language. Is that the right term? Yeah. And strategies, I'm still working it. That's why I'm here today. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amy. And when you say they don't sound as smart, like, could that be because they don't have the vocabulary or the language knowledge, or as well as the practice in or the confidence in expressing some of their ideas in the language?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely both. Because the person that said about they actually used those words, I don't feel as smart, was that it was around the fact, the way she explained it is that she had to translate everything in her head before she said it, and so it slowed everything down, and so she felt like the presentation skills weren't there, and she always had to search for the right words to describe things.
Yeah, absolutely. How about the other people, Natalia, Amy, David, Nathan, I see he's here on his iPhone.
David, you go, because I come from an English
you got lots to say.
Yeah.
I come from English teaching background.
It's interesting because I'm in the law school, which is part of the same faculty as Natalia, and I was actually going to, I was going to contact you, Natalia, to talk about this, because I'm teaching a commerce course, but it's a law course to non-law students, and then the vast majority are Chinese, and of course a lot of them are offshore. And I'm coordinating the course, and so my tutors have been saying, oh, the online course, they're not engaging, they've got the cameras off, and we put them in breakout rooms, and then they don't talk to each other, and I go and listen in, and they're not saying anything. And so as Amy said, that's why I signed up for this course. I thought you were going to tell me the answers.
We can go through some ideas.
I agree with everything Amy said, and I suppose the other thing is obviously the cultural aspect of not wanting, it's I do feel it is this a language thing, that they're worried, even if they think they're not smart, they are smart, but in English they think they're not smart, but then they've also got this cultural thing about not wanting to speak out, and then so they all come to you at the end of the class and one-on-one ask the questions. And so how are you going to make the class more interactive? That's the challenge, isn't it? So
yeah, and that's good. We will look at some ways to increase that participation, because it's very familiar. I've had that with some of my students as well, where you put them in the breakout rooms, and it's such a difficult thing to monitor, isn't it? Because you can't be in all the different breakout rooms at once, and they're not participating. So we'll take a look at some strategies to help with that, hopefully, David, throughout today.
Right.
As well as the questions. And different ways to tackle that, and to make them confident to be able to ask us questions at different times, so we're not all getting it at once at the end of a lecture. Hi, Dana.
Hi.
Oh, yeah. We're just having a look at some of the challenges that we're facing for our EAL students now in our programs and classes. Nathan, are you able to... Hi. Oh, it's not Nathan.
It's Tracy.
Tracy, sorry, your title's Nathan's iPhone, so I'm just calling you Nathan's iPhone. Tracy, how about you?
Unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Sorry. Yeah, I'm joining from my phone. For some reason it comes up as my husband's name, so apologies for that. I'm in the business school, and I teach project management, and like my other colleagues, I guess I find the wall of participation, particularly online. So I'm really keen to learn some strategies around that. I think some of the barriers are consistent with what some of the other colleagues have raised. I guess in my mind, where I would appreciate some guidance as well is, I guess, teaching project management. It's a very practical, hands-on type of vocation. So if the students that are studying here intend to get work here, I also wonder what is the tolerance, like how much do we tolerate in terms of non-participation and difference, in terms of how do we also encourage a different way of working, because the non-participation is not really going to lead to an employment outcome. So I guess that's one query I have in my mind around our obligation to be accepting and encouraging, but also facilitating new ways of thinking. In terms of the best success I've had was in face-to-face. So I teach a summer school class, and half of those students are generally from China and half are from India. And so what I get them to do is, it was just so happened I could break them into these groups. And I got the Chinese students to teach me something about China that I didn't know, and I got the Indian students to teach me something about India that I didn't know. And it was so much fun. The Indian students taught me some Bollywood, and the Chinese students taught me how to say toilet in Chinese. So when I went there, I knew how to ask for the toilet. And I found I did that like in the first day, and then for the rest of the course, they were much more relaxed and willing to approach me. So I find face-to-face you can do more things like that, but online it's just so, and that was also intensive, so you had the time to build the trust. engage with, I do find challenging. Yeah, so I'd be in for some.
All right. Thanks, Tracy. You cut out a little bit at the end, but I get the interest in the challenge of the participation as well, especially the online participation, but some really good ideas on how your course benefited from that interaction and how the students taught each other some aspects of their culture. And so we'll get back to that as well. Diana, did you want to just come in with a couple of your challenges that you've had with your EAL students and any strategies you use, or how your courses benefit?
Yeah, right. Myself coming from, English as my additional language as well. So I think I kind of aware of these problems. So what I try to put more effort with these students, like for myself, actually, I do teach a lot of international students, and same as Tracy, I have different groups like from China and also from India. So the same problem that we have, lack of engagement, interactions. The first thing that I found the problem is with when with the video off. So you can't see them and you don't know what they're doing. So that's the first problem that I encountered, that, okay, so we should make them to have the camera on. And then you can see them, and then you can feel the social presence, and you start to engage with them more and try to, be friendly as you can. And they start to feel comfortable with this environment in Zoom. Yeah, that's what we're using. And what I can try to support more is just try to feel, put myself in their shoe, and, especially we as international students, myself last time, I think the barrier is just try to understand and try to speak, fluently. So the communication skills, sometimes try to be more, keep asking them whether they understand, try to make myself clear to them, and then especially in terms of subject that I'm teaching, that I'm teaching IT. So most of the time, it's more on programming. So obviously, it doesn't really, involve much in communication wise. But what I can see, I'll try to break them in groups, and then try them to work on together, and then try to, yes, as I think many people do, we go in breakout room, and then we try to talk to them and try to make them engage, and then try to make them talk to their friends. I think the best way is using some other technologies, that what I learned right now with the course that we have, like with Amy, right? So we try to engage with using all these different tools, such as Padlet and then Mentimeter. So all these kind of tools, actually, I think is work to make them do something rather than, passively waiting.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. And we'll have a look at some of those and have a look at some of those other tools that we can use as well. It's so nice to hear some of those strategies already in place. And hopefully some of the things we discussed today will address some of those challenges that you've all identified. So initially, we'll look at how we can facilitate effective input. So what can we do in our classes to assist and support our EAL students in terms of what we give them? And then we'll look at some strategies to promote participation a little bit later. Okay, so to start with, I'll just put in another acronym here. So EIL, or English as an International Language. And EIL is viewed as a type of English as well as a way of using English. So English, being usually the default, shall we say, for international, intercultural communication. So in other words, we view English not only in that monolingual, traditional native speakers sense and interaction, but also multicultural and intercultural settings. So in these settings, English might be used as a tool to communicate between EAL students. And the focus of what is meant by communication can change slightly. So we can encompass aspects such as a focus on clarity as opposed to a focus on fluency. So clear communication of ideas and meanings rather than the need to speak quickly or speak, in a native speaker-like way, with the inclusion of, for example, hesitation devices, etc. Accents are embraced, and there's not one correct way of speaking or pronouncing words, as long as communicability is maintained. And this is also valuing and appreciating the background of the speaker and acknowledging that there's multiple ways of expressing something. There's not one correct way. For example, let's take the speaker and the listener in a discourse, and this can happen in a group work situation in one of your courses. Now, there's two issues here. On the one hand, the speaker needs to develop the ability to adjust their pronunciation to consider the listener and make, and so to be accommodating towards the listener and help them understand. But on the other hand, the listeners also have a role to play. So listeners have to accept that they can't expect perfect pronunciation 100% of the time. And they have to also learn to cope with a certain amount of transfer from the other language. When we talk about EAL, we also talk about a lower focus or less focus on idiomatic phrases, which often don't carry the same meaning across language and cultures. There's certain phrases that just don't translate. And it's interesting to note that our EAL students must make these changes, or they're used to making these changes in their communication strategies. They often have practice with this, but it's an issue that's not only confined to our EAL students, as our monolingual English speakers often struggle to moderate their language in these situations because perhaps they don't have the practice or the awareness of the need to moderate. It depends on how much exposure to multicultural communication they've had. Examples of common errors of confusion could happen because of, for example, vocabulary. So words such as fortnight and 2 weeks. So we use fortnight in Australia. It's a British word, they use it in Britain, but in Northern America, they don't use it, they use 2 weeks, and they don't understand the meaning of fortnight necessarily. So, in terms of our classes, how often is a fortnight? Does everyone understand it? If we tell our students, the task is due in a fortnight, they're not familiar with this word, it could cause some kind of panic, some blockage, and then they don't understand the task because they're blocked on that. So in terms of that, that focus on the language that we use is so important. And another example is even just the speed of our speech and pausing, ensuring that we provide our EAL students with enough time to formulate their thoughts and choose their words. And we'll look at that as one of our strategies, this thinking time or the pausing time, to give them the opportunity to decide, okay, I'm internalising the knowledge, what language am I going to say, what words am I going to use? And they're giving them that time to prepare it so that they're more confident when they're actually presenting it to the rest of the class. So using these principles of English as an international language, how can we support our students? So some strategies include being clear with students and ensuring that we all have this shared understanding and ability to communicate. So in terms of that, we can consider paraphrasing. We can consider paraphrasing with more simple vocabulary, with more simple terminology. We can also consider the instructions we give our students. Are these clear? Are they unambiguous? So keeping your language simple, using imperatives rather than long, complex instructions, breaking things up into stages for our students. So all of these things can help having that clarity and that shared communication. And then we also need to be very aware of our own language. We all have accents. We all have specific ways of pronouncing specific words. And we have to ask ourselves if this is hindering comprehension. Consider slowing down, including that thinking time, the pausing. So giving students that time to process the new knowledge, consider how it relates to their current knowledge, and plan what reaction and what language they're going to use. So this can slow things down considerably, especially in the online space. So it's worthwhile thinking prior to the presentation how this is actually going to be embedded and what time it's being given. It can really help those interactions. And in the online environment, we're relying more on our oral communication. There's that less space for the use of any of the paralinguistic devices or body language that we usually use to assist with communication. and that affects the understanding between groups as well. So clarity in our speech and consideration of the speed and the word choice become even more important within this online environment. Other ways we can support our students is being aware of when we use idiomatic phrases, slang, or other culturally specific terms. Being prepared, knowing the language you use and considering alternatives prior to the delivery of your lectures. You might consider recording yourself or listening to a recording of your lecture. As often in the moment, it's hard to stop ourselves, or it's hard to analyse what we're saying or how we're saying something. So often it is worthwhile just to spend some time listening to ourselves and thinking, okay, are there any instances of what I said or how I said it that could potentially cause challenges for my students in their comprehension? Another way of supporting is to make our learning objectives really clear and staying focused on these. Sometimes the tangents that happen in our classrooms are so interesting and they lead to the discovery of some other knowledge, but it could be that tangential kind of discussion that makes it very difficult for a student to follow. So avoiding these tangents, maintaining focus on the one objective at a time can really support our EAL students. In terms of supporting them in written input, so by written input, I mean things like task sheets or handouts. It could even be things like the My Uni announcements or your lecture slides. A very simple yet effective way of supporting our students could be the inclusion of glossaries. So many of us use glossaries anyway with key terms and definitions, etc. And that can be a really easy way to ensure that students are not only aware of subject-specific vocab that they're going to need before a lecture, for example, but they have some time to be able to explore it, translate it, get a deeper understanding of it by doing some research of their own. So when they come to class, when they come to the lecture, when they come to the tutorial, they already have an understanding of key terms and are more confident in using them. And this can be done as a simple list on My Uni that they have to go through before the lecture or the class. Alternatively, there are some more interesting ways to embed it. So the use of things like, well, you can use the My Uni quizzes or other interactive tools like Quizlet or Kahoot, which are some online tools that are very easy to set up, and students can either work individually on them or you can use them in class, or they can do both. But you can set it up so that then the main terms are identified and worked on before they come to your class. Another way we can support our EAL students in the written input is avoiding unnecessary text where possible. It can be quite overwhelming sometimes. They're already doing a lot of reading, so where we can assist them by avoiding overwhelming them with unnecessary text, it will decrease any opportunity for misunderstanding and really help them focus on the task. So keeping the main points clear and easy to identify as main points is essential. And leading on from that, using visuals to support these tasks, so either using charts, graphs, diagrams, can also decrease the risk of being overloaded by too much text. And it can also serve to provide a visual explanation to support the written one. And then similarly to the discussion before, continuing to consider the use of idiomatic language or complex language and simplifying our language to facilitate communicability. And by simplifying, it doesn't mean it has to be dumbed down to a certain, to below level. It just means perhaps using shorter sentences, less complex sentences, more imperatives. So write this, do this, etc. Moving on to how we can support our students in spoken input. So in this case, in your lectures or in the tutorials or consultations where we want to get that spoken communication with our students. If we try to follow some of the EAL or English for International as an international language principles from before, then this hopefully can reduce the need for students to resort to other strategies such as translators. I don't know if you have that happen in your classes sometimes, or where they get their phone out and they start trying to find the words, etc., which then means that they may miss out on some content that is essential for their understanding. So allowing them to give more attention and focus to the content that's being discussed at the time means that they'll get a deeper understanding of it and hopefully feel more confident and participate more. So even in these situations, providing that glossary of key terms, having that focus on vocabulary, including the definitions of these before the specific activities, or explaining them as part of the instructions, can really help them understand what to do and give them confidence to participate. Embedding some kind of repetition or rewording or paraphrasing of main ideas and planning for this prior to our spoken input can really help as well, because it's important for students to have multiple occasions to hear the main points and understand. So multiple exposure points to the key ideas that you're presenting. And in our spoken input, having that clear structure and planning the language that we were going to use to show students the content will help them understand. So we call this signposting, and signposting refers to those words and phrases that help the listener understand the structure. It might tell students what's coming up, what you've covered, or when it's important for them to take notes. So for example, in your introduction, state how many points there will be and identify these throughout the lecture clearly. For example, firstly, secondly, thirdly, using expressions like that, all of our transition words, identifying when you're going to give an example. So by clearly stating an example for this is, and clearly identifying when you're moving on to the next point. So, okay, let's move on to the next point. So including those signposts helps students hear out for when there's going to be a change in topic or when something happens that's important, and gives them a cue that they need to listen. So we're helping students identify those cues. Within the online environment, it's even harder, but we can use chat, for example, if we're teaching in Zoom, to support these visual messages. So including some brief instructions in chat, paraphrasing some ideas in chat, because sometimes they might miss it in the spoken input. So it's often useful to have the written input as backup as well. So moving on now to facilitating these group discussions and increasing confidence, because it's a lot about their confidence. Part of this as well, has anyone had a look at Hofstede and the dimensions of culture? This has a bit of an impact, or quite a large impact, on our students. So one of the most used concepts, I guess, related to cultural dimensions is that of Hofstede. So he first proposed 4 cultural dimensions, and then he added 2 more cultural dimensions. So there's a total of 6 dimensions of culture that he proposes influence how people behave. So these 6 dimensions are power distance, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, individualism and collectivism, long-term orientation, and indulgence. For our purposes, and it's long been claimed that teaching and learning that occur are quite heavily influenced by a student's own cultural orientation, as well as a teacher's own cultural orientation. And for the purposes of today, we'll look at power distance and individualism versus collectivism, because this often has an impact on how students might participate in our classes. So power distance refers to the concept of power, meaning the influence of authority over another person. So if power interferes in relationships, the structure of that relationship can change, resulting in positive or negative outcomes depending on the purpose for which the power is exercised. So in some contexts, teachers are perceived as having a certain kind of higher power over students. So it's expected that they use this authority over students, and students then behave in a certain way towards teachers. In low power distance situations or cultures, it's not expected that teachers exert this type of authority over students. So Australia, for example, would we be a high power distance or low power distance environment? You can put it in the chat or you can just call out.
We're low.
Well, personally, I think quite low.
Yeah.
But the students don't. These students don't see it like that, obviously. But
and that might mean that they might come from a higher power distance culture.
Yeah. In China, they do.
Yeah. So, for example, Natalia, can you give some examples?
Yeah. Well, I had a talk with quite a number of students, and they normally mention that they're not really allowed to talk to their lecturers in China, and the lecturer gives the lecture and just goes away, and what the students are left with is basically the input, and they just need to do the reading and, you know, starting on their own without any opportunity to actually ask those questions. So they're not used to asking questions to the lecturer, and they see that authority as quite distant. So they would be somewhere in the bottom of the pyramid and the lecturer would be on top. And they often don't realize how different it is here, and they try to approach you by, you know how you notice they don't call you by name, they call you teacher, which is the sign of respect in that culture. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly one of the ways that we can identify that, is thinking about how your students address you. Do they use your first name? Do they use your last name, or a title owner? So it could be teacher or professor, rather than using your name. And that's that distance and that sign of respect. And that's how they show it.
And they also try to use some overly complicated language, like overly formal language, when they talk to you, not always using it correctly, which is sometimes funny.
Yeah, that's all their emails are very short. That's right. And then, yeah, and Roger's just mentioned something in the chat as well. When is it appropriate to ask for help either in person or via email? So also considering how comfortable are they in asking questions, seeking clarification.
They're not really trained, or they're not encouraged to ask for help or questions, because that shows that they're stupid or something like that, and they're afraid of showing this in this environment. So I mean, from my experience, it takes a bit of time to actually feed that into them, to say, look, we here are partners, so I teach you, you teach me, so we kind of collaborate. So it takes a bit of time and effort to show them that.
That's right, because we have to understand that our students have had X number of years of practice in a particular way. And then they come here and we're in schooling and education and life with those different power distances, for example. And then they come here and suddenly they're expected to change this belief system that they have almost, and these experiences that they've had. So it's quite challenging sometimes for students to do that. So understanding the rationale, the reason behind that reticence sometimes to ask questions or to come forward leads to a bit more of an understanding as to why they're doing it and how we can deal with it. So explicitly guiding them through the process and letting them know it's okay, and setting up situations where they can do this in a safe environment, perhaps very guided at first, will give them the confidence and the awareness that they are able to do that here.
One good example, one good example we had in the faculty a couple of years ago, and you might be familiar with this one actually, David, was in our Commercial Law 1 course, which has a large number of international students. We did trial, when it was available, the on-task messaging system. So
yeah, Nengi did that. Yeah,
and that worked really well. So we basically, the learning management system sent out an automated message to students if they had failed to complete something, or perhaps their grade wasn't what we were expecting in their first assessment piece, just saying, hi Roger, I noticed this, da-da-da-da, best wishes Nengi, if you need to contact me. A lot of positive response from students, because that wall was initially broken, such as, well, if my course coordinator is contacting me, then maybe I am allowed to contact them. And because it had an automated personalised feature, it wasn't just dear student or something, and we could take away that punitive undertone. We have something similar, but it's not quite as personalised as on task anymore, unfortunately. But it was one of those unexpected benefits, was breaking down that barrier with some of our international students.
Perfect. And this happens not only from student to teacher, remembering, but also in the class. as well, and the relationships between students and what they perceive as a hierarchy potentially between student to student, and that could have some kind of effect with their contribution, their participation, their asking questions in class. And then closely tied to that power distance is also the idea of collectivism and individualism as well. So, you know, collectivism, for example, if we think about the background of our students, you know, in collectivist cultures, children are rewarded for behaviour that conforms to group harmony or conforms to norms, cultural norms and social traditions, so they fit in, whereas in individualist cultures, children, you know, we're encouraged to compete with our peers, we're rewarded for our initiative, for our, you know, critical thinking and our individual initiative and expression. So, you know, the standing out is important. So in relation to our students, you know, even that collectivist versus individualist culture, that can affect participation. You know, so in the classroom, that might be the students that don't call out, the students that don't put their hand up because they're afraid of standing out. They just want to fit in. So asking a question or participating or even saying the answer if it's correct is perceived as standing out. So they'd rather fit in. And that can also be related to who should they go to for help? Do they go to their peers or their teachers? You know, so all these questions are raised, which makes it challenging for our students to know how to navigate some of the questions that they might have.
Question before you jump on.
Yeah.
Would it then, like, when you've got large numbers of international students, would it be appropriate to sort of incorporate, I guess, some sort of cultural education on expectations, well, not expectations, but like, you know, the differences that they will find obviously studying in an Australian environment versus where they've come from, whether it be India, China, Asia?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll take a look at an activity that I often use to discuss cultural norms that opens up a conversation, which I think in a non-judgmental way. So just opening up that conversation and making them aware of it. And also setting expectations, teaching them our expectations through discussions, warmers, icebreakers of and openly talking about these differences can really help them. Yeah, absolutely. So on the screen is just a quick sample of some cultures and the differences of power distance and individualism rating. And so, you know, you can see between Australia and China, Hofstede, this is Hofstede's ratings, identified Australia as having a lower PD and a much higher individualism rating. And the pattern is similar for the other countries, Malaysia and India, although the ratings differ slightly. And if you'd like to have a look at that with some of the other cultures, there's the link in the references, and I'll send you this PDF, this PowerPoint at the end of the session, so you can have a look at that as well. But let's have a look at what it means for the classroom. So exactly what Amy was talking about. You know, some students may feel more comfortable working within a teacher-centred learning environment and be more reticent to participate in group work or student-centred activities, and maybe don't participate at all unless it's in that teacher-centred environment where the teacher is just telling them what to do. So in this case, how can we support these students? So like Amy said, we can embed some explicit explanation of the learning objectives into the tutorials and class discussions. Why is it important to participate in group work? How does this relate to the overall course outcomes and to their assessment if it does? So providing students with that clear explanation of why an activity is important, what skills are being developed. That's what they want to hear, and that will make it more purposeful and more meaningful for them. So for example, in a group discussion, we might highlight to students that they're developing specific skills like, okay, in this one we're working on problem solving and negotiating. And these are relevant to the overall course aims because they're going to help you do this. And then including how these are relevant to the aims is important because it indicates the purpose. So spending a little bit extra time and doing that and highlighting that is very important. It shows the students there's more purpose to it. The students may feel less comfortable asking questions to their tutors and prefer to get assistance from their peers. Not a bad thing, really, but sometimes we want them to ask the tutors. And so in that case, we could provide some alternative opportunities, such as setting some specific times for questions or starting the conversation, you know, sending out some questions to them in a kind of a personal tone, and then you might get some more responses back. They might feel that opens up the door to communication, and it's okay for them to email you with questions as well.
I mean, one thing that, you know, you would think would be quite useful there to bridge the gap between getting help from their peers and from their tutors would be discussion board, you know, that type of thing. Because, you know, you encourage students so that maybe another student can answer the question, also means they don't bother you so much. But of course, you can jump in and, you know, if it, and, you know, contribute as the tutor or the lecturer. But I don't know about the rest of you, but we don't get a great use of discussion board. Even when I've given them participation, say, well, like you can participate by making comments on discussion board, and that goes towards your participation grade, still doesn't seem to work, because maybe it goes back to this thing that they still think they'll be feeling dumb, but then they can even post anonymously. So I don't know why they don't use it.
Yeah, I think domestic students are the same though in terms of the discussion board. Unless they're specifically studying online, they don't tend to engage in the discussion board.
That's true. That's true.
Also with international students, they sometimes don't know how to use the system. I'm in my uni, so they also need to be educated on how to approach certain areas of the course page. And we normally assume that they know how, and that they're digital and they're tech savvy and whatever, but they are sometimes really struggling to find stuff on the course page. So probably guiding them through would be an option here as well.
And potentially embedding some guided activities in the sessions, such as, you know, let's all put a question on the discussion board and see if we can get some responses. So kind of forcing them into that situation in the classroom could have some benefit in that then some students will take that and then continue to do that outside of class.
Yeah,
and I think,
also, you know, like an action bound type of thing, you know, like a quiz where you have some QR codes to scan and then they take it to different parts of the course page. This could be like a pre-course activity, which is
that's right, like a treasure hunt around the course page.
So that, yeah, I mean, there are free apps out there, or the QR codes that can be generated through Canvas tools as well.
Yeah, that's right. So great ideas to try to increase that participation in the My Uni space, but not overestimating their tech skills and their familiarity with the learning management system, which they may not have used before, but which we tend to take for granted. Absolutely. And then, so in summary, with that, we need to build those skills to work within our academic environment, giving them that explicit guidance. So, you know, I think it's up to us to consider at the beginning of our course, potentially at the beginning of each week, what are the roadblocks to their learning for a particular activity, etc., and embed some opportunities or development strategies to assist them in developing those skills, because they won't just happen. We need to predict them, and we need to develop some ways to help them with it. So in terms of promoting active participation, what are some other ways that we can promote this? And again, it goes back to explicitly discussing, for example, the role tutorials have in learning. So, you know, for some students, the idea of creative and actively participating in the classroom and in activities that focus on, you know, we know that this gives the students a deeper understanding, etc., but that's completely new to them, that kind of learning. So explicit explanation of it helps them see the purpose in it, and then guided activities that lead to it can help them participate more. So identification of purpose makes the activities meaningful to their learning and overall goal, which could then encourage participation. If they don't see the purpose in it because they've not had the background of it, they're not going to do it. Ensuring there's a shared understanding by avoiding or explaining culturally specific questions, so that all activities, all questions are inclusive and that students are able to participate. So just maybe running over it with a culturally critical eye and making sure that all our activities have that inclusivity in them. There's one example of an essay about the beach being given to students from a landlocked country who may never have seen the beach. You know, that's an extreme example, but just thinking what we're asking the students to do. Do they have the cultural knowledge to be able to do it? Using other strategies, you know, the old think, pair, share, where the students think or have some time individually to collect their ideas and then share with a partner. So that focuses on the individual preparation time, preparing their ideas, preparing their language prior to sharing it with a partner, which is less risky and is more safe than sharing with the whole group, which can really make them stand out. So if they're sharing with a partner and many partners are talking, there's a louder noise level in the room, they're not standing out as much, they're more likely to participate. In the online environment, we will be looking at that in the breakout rooms, which then bring the challenges of how do we encourage that interaction in the breakout rooms. But perhaps by forcing them to be just a partner, there's nowhere for them to hide. They have to interact with each other, and dropping in and checking on them can also help with that. And, you know, it's all about their building the confidence in their ability to communicate their ideas so that they don't sound silly. So
Can
that
I just,
yeah.
Sorry, can I just add on this? You know,
Yeah.
when you send them to breakout rooms, I found it useful to actually tell them to nominate who's going to be reporting back from the group.
That's right.
And sometimes if you want to spice it up, you can say, well, the person with most work experience can report back, or the youngest person in the group can report back, so that you kind of get this turnover of people and it's not just the same person reporting from the same group. When you set it up from the very beginning, then they kind of have to think about who's going to report, and they also pay more attention to the discussion because they know that you're going to be asking for that kind of feedback.
Absolutely. So nominating at the beginning, nominating a spokesperson and even nominating the roles within the group gives them more direction and gives them more structure. And they also then are very clear on what your expectations are. Someone will have to speak, someone will have to present the ideas. So they're very clear expectations and the outcomes are clear. So being directive and being specific with those roles. And then as students get used to it, then maybe you can be less directive and the students can take on that responsibility for themselves. But in the beginning, it is being quite directive. So, you know, if I'm going to put you in a group, who's wearing blue today, you know, it can be as random as that. Whoever's wearing blue, you're the group leader today. Everyone discuss, you'll be taking notes and presenting it to the rest of us in 5 minutes. So that kind of directiveness can really help them, and it takes the pressure away from them having to negotiate who is the leader and who is not the leader. So it takes all that pressure away. You've given them that and they can just concentrate on, you know, exchanging their ideas. And also, you know, the explicit direction about the expectations of participation. And so taking some time, either at the start of the course or at certain points in the course, to set up what your expectations are related to participation and inclusion. And sometimes this can be done through a shared reading activity where they all read something about the importance of participating, and then you set up some discussion or some comprehension questions that they discuss, or it could be a video and then you set up some kind of task so that they're reflecting on the video and how it relates to class. So there are some ways to get that kind of shared understanding of what participation and inclusion means. And it's not something that will happen if you just do it once. You know, you need to do this on a regular basis, because you do it at the start of the course. They're so overwhelmed by so much information at the start of the course that by the time week 2, week 3 comes, they've fallen into other habits again. So it might be something you need to come back to. It might be something that you need to be persistent with, and hopefully by the end they'll get it. And then that's a skill that they will take with them into other courses. It's a skill that they will take with them into their subsequent years at the university, and then also hopefully into their employment after university as well. Okay. And so dealing with smaller group work, the ideas are fairly similar. Again, you know, giving those explicit discussions, providing explicit directions. And I think in terms of this, also creating, opportunities for international and local students to work together if possible. They might sometimes, you know, immediately go into friendship groups or groups that they know and are comfortable with. But there are many benefits on getting students to work together in different groups, you know, considering always how you'll facilitate the atmosphere of learning and mutual respect. You know, bearing in mind that there needs to be adaptation on both sides, you know, considering before the principles of EAL, there needs to be that adaptation of language and shared understanding of that it's not going to be perfect, but there is that communicability. And, you know, as well as a shared understanding of what the benefits are in working with multinational, multicultural groups at university as well as in their career. And then, and this is something you mentioned earlier, Amy, is there a way to include a discussion on cultural norms in the task? So consider embedding some cultural activities or discussions in your classes. So, for example, is there time to include a quick discussion on cultural norms, opening them up in a non-judgmental way, and that can often lead to people viewing factors in a variety of ways and being more prepared if they actually encounter some difficulties, because, you know, we do encounter some difficulties in group work, in our participation, when there is a, you know, a conflict of understanding. So if we discuss it, then maybe they're more prepared to deal with it. Oh, yeah, this is an example of a discussion on cultural norms that can lead to a greater cross-cultural understanding in groups. So in this one, for example, the case studies of an Australian student studying on an exchange program in Indonesia, and the Indonesian lecturer makes a mistake on the board, makes an error on the board, it happens. And the exchange student points out the error during the lecture, and the lecturer gets annoyed and asks him to leave and never come back, and the student is confused. So obviously it's a little bit exaggerated, but it's done that way to try to get a reaction, and the students are asked to discuss the behaviour of the student, behaviour of the lecturer, what potential misunderstandings have occurred, what perceptions and misperceptions are involved, and a possible solution. So no right or wrong answers, simply a vehicle for an open discussion on what might have happened. And then that can then lead into different interpretations about certain behaviours, which, you know, could lead to some interesting discussions. So things like a person comes to a meeting half an hour late after the stated starting time. So, you know, for our students who might come in late to lectures and think it's okay, this can start that conversation of why it's not. And, you know, number 8, it talks about, you know, academic integrity, etc. So these can be tailored to any issues that you might have encountered with your students or in your classes, and it can just open up the discussion. And this can be something that can be shortened or lengthened or done at different points during the semester, etc. As a quick warmer in class, or as something when you're changing topics, just to change the energy in the room. Thanks. And Roger's just put in a chat a group management tool built into LMS that can assist with setting groups based on a range of demographics. And the link is there. Thank you, Roger.
I have a question. I don't know if it's the experience, but with these like little discussion point activities, do you think they'll work in an online environment where they, like, so if you ask a question and get them to go in the chat, or do you think they'll still not want to sort of stand out in that situation if they're still in a larger group?
Others might have different experiences, but I've found that once if they're in the chat, they're often a little bit more open than in the large group and in plenary, because that's a little bit more confronting to say your views like that. So in the chat, it doesn't have to be long, you know, it can just be 1 or 2 words.
Yeah.
They might interact. And if you get it started and then, you know, you put it in the chat and then they can.
Yeah. Because then I could see like leading into that discussion around the different cultural norms.
Yeah, that's right. It just kind of activates their knowledge and gets them thinking in that way. And then you can bring in other aspects as well. And then just to finish off, a few other ways to promote interactivity and group work, you know, that more guided, that more scaffolded interactivity and participation that we want. There's an activity that we call jigsaw readings. Some of you might be familiar with that, where, Natalia, do you want to explain it?
It's when one student gets one part of the text and another student gets a different one, and they have to fill each other up on the information in the text. And I think jigsaw listening is also another option when you have an option of putting them into different rooms or in an online environment. There might be just different links that different groups of students get.
Yeah.
And then they're actually forced to talk to each other to find out the details.
That's right. So it forces the interaction, and there's a clear purpose for it because it's communication. So they're not just talking about the same text, they're actually having to explain, David's read one text, I've read another text, and we have to bring our knowledge together to answer a specific question. So it's forcing some kind of interaction, so putting them out of their comfort zone and making them have a reason to communicate. And then pair work being some other ways of promoting, quick pair work, listing advantages, disadvantages, similar, different, often having a very specific task rather than just discuss can help with the participation as well. So if they have a specific task, if they have a time limit, if they have clear roles in their group, you will find that sending them off to breakout rooms is more purposeful, and that they will complete that task and come back, and then they'll have something to present. Things like asking students to predict knowledge at the start of a topic, you know, they could put it in the chat. So the topic is on this, give me some words that you know related to this topic. And that will help our EAL students because they will see some of the words coming up and they'll say, well, I don't know that one, I'll check it now, or they'll start thinking about it. So it's all about activating their knowledge of that topic before they're put into a more pressured situation, such as listening to a lecture or participating in a discussion. Asking students to discuss in pairs at the end of a lecture what was challenging, what was interesting. It helps that peer support as well, so they don't feel alone that I'm the only one that was super challenged by this. They can interact a little bit and share experiences. The use of online quizzes like Kahoot and Quizlet or Padlet, we spoke about, which isn't a quiz, but it's a way of collating online information that's quite interesting. Asking students to label graphs and charts before showing answers. So if you're showing something in your lecture or in your tutorial, you show it without the labels, for example, ask the students to try to predict what will be on that chart, and then you show your answers. That way they have thought about it, they've predicted it, and they can check their answers. Some picture prompts, some summary activities as well, or giving students some kind of task or problem at the start of the lecture to solve in their groups. And then at the end of the lecture, you can come back and see if they can actually solve it. So a purpose for their note-taking, helping guide what they have to take notes on, for example, what they have to listen for, what they have to be aware of. So a couple of different ideas there. Yeah. And so any strategies that you could embed in your tutorials or lectures, or are there any other challenges that you see arising from embedding strategies like that to help support our EAL students?
I'm mindful we're being like our EAL students right now. We're not answering.
I just pause. I give you a lot of thinking time. In that case, I could put you in groups. You could put them in groups. You would probably have a bit of chat. You've got to think about it, put it in groups, and then come back, which you won't do now. I
think I know the answer to this. There's never it's never too late to embed these strategies. Like now that we're like week 5 of the semester, it's not too late to embed them, is it? It's like you can still have those cultural discussions. And yeah,
absolutely. I think it's never too late. Yeah. It does, and it's hard. Oh, sorry, David. I was just going to say it is, you know, it is hard to embed it in what probably is already a full curriculum, and so it's thinking about how to balance it and how much time you have as well. Yeah. Sorry, David.
No, I don't really. What I was going to sort of talk about was some of the positive benefits of, you know, the multicultural aspect of. One course that I teach is a master's course to. It's a real mixture of disciplines. it's in the architecture school, but it's a law course. And then we've also got some non-law master's students who are in the business school. And so it's a great mixture. And also it's a mixture of nationalities as well. So we often get Chinese, but we get some Vietnamese and quite a few Indian students these days, and the local ones too. So it's a great mixture. And, you know, when Roger was saying about the LMS demographic tool, I was thinking, oh, social engineering, like how do we decide who goes in which group? But because what I do is I just kind of like randomly, I say like, they do group presentations,
Yeah.
and this counts, this is an assessment, you know. And so I choose those groups. I don't let them form their own groups because that would be disastrous, with, you know. So I basically just randomly do it using the class list, and I just start at the top and then I work down. And so I end up with random groups. But the great thing about it is we've had some friendships, you know, multicultural friendships being formed because I've been teaching this course for 5 years. So it's really good actually, because it's not a big class. It's only like 40 students or something. So, but you know, the positive benefits is you can get some great cultural awareness and friendships emerging out of it. And I was just thinking about what you were saying about the, you know, the cultural exercise that Amy was just asking about as well. I was just thinking, well, maybe like in the first class, I was thinking about my course next term, actually get them to discuss, you know, what's the learning like where you've come from, you know, you've studied in Thailand, whatever, like, how does your course work there? You know, do you speak to the lecturer? Do you have tutorials in groups? They can talk about that and then report back. And that would be quite a comfortable way of discussing the cultural differences.
Absolutely. And everyone likes talking about home as well, don't they? Like it makes you feel welcome. It makes you feel listened to as well. And so I think it's a wonderful way to get everyone involved and learn from each other.
I actually think that you can link that cultural aspect to any topic you discuss. So if you talk about a particular law in a particular setting or a particular scenario, you can just ask them, how would this work in your home country and why? And this would kind of bridge that cultural gap as well.
Yeah, I do that when I can, although they don't always know. You know, they haven't studied that law necessarily in their country, and I also don't like to do it too much because then I'm kind of singling them out for being from that country. I rather keep it more of a general discussion and say, has anyone got an experience they'd like to share from their background or something like that? But yeah, when I can. I mean, I also teach them comparative courses where the actual subject matter is comparing the laws of different countries anyway. So that's easy really to do.
I will just add that I think even though it's a particular cohort, certainly any of our level 1 courses and our first year courses, even in the postgraduate field, can be a great Trojan horse for some of this, because some of the issues that we're talking about how learners adapt, etc., are transferable to the domestic market as well as the international. And I think exactly like David was touching on then, I think especially in level 1, rather than just saying, okay, we'll look at this cultural aspect, bringing it broader, that cultural difference, those challenges, those really positive aspects will come to the fore through some of that as well, under the guise of those first year courses. And the last thing on this as well is what is jumping out at me is certainly one thing I can work on, which is certainly part of my job, is maybe developing some shared resource that we can use moving forward for students around some of the online engagement that we can make available to lecturers and course coordinators as an embedded resource or a short video they can put up at the start of lectures as well. So rather than trying to produce something 200 times over, I'm sure I have far more resource and time, more importantly, to produce one thing that could be a good conversation starter, etc. So if anyone's got ideas, feel free to send them through and I can start work on that as well.
Roger, you probably check with LEI because I'm pretty sure there are modules developed on effective learning, which I think are automatically embedded in all the course shells. So that could be just part of the project.
That's a good
I mean,
idea.
I looked at all the modules available on LEI and everywhere else, because my tutors were really kind of stressed about the online teaching in the first few weeks. They said, like, the students are not engaging at all. And the ironic thing is, like, 2 out of my 3 tutors are international students themselves. I mean, English isn't their first language, but I looked at what was available, and I must admit, there was some good stuff. And obviously there was the stuff that was done last year during COVID, where there's that table that compares, you know, face-to-face learning to remote learning. So I read all that, but I must admit, some of the things we've been talking about today that Paula's sort of got in her slides have been more appropriate than anything I've read so far anywhere else. So it'd be great if there was something that we could all, course coordinators, could just access that across the uni.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it can be a shared project between faculties and LEI, because we've got these resources and the research backing up those resources. So it's kind of reasonable. Roger, do you want to talk about it?
Okay.
Sorry, I've done
At
the
some
mute
stage.
again. I think my next step really would go the way to have a look at those. I think I've got to put in both your camps there. I think some of the resources are really good, really adaptable. Others might be a little bit more than an arm's length in terms of their application. So I think what we might be missing is that bridge of, why would I go and use those resources? That short thing for students and academics that says, okay, this is why getting these resources, engaging with the learning on that side of things is so important. And then there's that real practical thing, I guess, which David's talking about as well, is, okay, it's my first shoot, no one's engaging. What do I do? I unfortunately can't get in the DeLorean, go back and rewrite my course and actually, you know, have great pedagogical ways to get involved in online. And I do really feel for our academics and our students, because our institution's history with online learning is very limited. And I think it would be fair to say, because we were sort of racing to the start blocks to get there, it's still not a proper online learning experience, in the aspect the technology and the resources are not what you would expect in a fully online environment. And we have that challenge of the blended learning as well. So I think there's a lot we can pull in there, but certainly some of that intermediary, if that's the word, of, yeah, okay, why do I need this? Where is it? And go, I think would be really good, as well as some of that short stuff that academics can leverage straight into a lecture, whether it's a 30-second video, whether it's some short handouts, these sorts of things. And then that link back to those modules would be really good as well.
So so I teach into the personal professional development with Natalia and Diana, and the activity that we had we had an activity last week in class for the on-campus students. It involved collecting physical formal learning resources and some digital ones. I adapted that for our online students who are primarily from China, and rather than them going and just trying to find things without any guidance, I actually gave them a set list. I gave them the name of the resource and some questions that they had to go and answer. And all of them did it. And I've had numerous emails come back saying, thank you, I didn't know these resources existed. I'm finding them really useful. And they're all resources that are there and available, but they just didn't know about it. They didn't have the I guess, knowledge that they could go and search for it. And so because we gave them that experience in class, they now feel more confident about searching for it and using those resources.
And I think that's excellent, because certainly one of the issues we've always had with academic support is putting it there, and 5% of students who find it will use it, but the contextual use, such as, okay, I'm having an issue in this course or with this particular thing, I don't necessarily need it now, but I need to know what to find. Whereas our traditional approach is, okay, here's a pretty generalist, if you're lucky, website or link, or we'll push you in that direction. Now go help yourself. And you don't know what you don't know. Yeah.
So it was very much like a scavenger hunt. So things like obviously the writing centre and the maths centre, which are fairly normal. But I even asked them to go and search for the talking with Aussies and things like that, so that they could go and search for the specific international student support and the remote student support.
That was very useful to me. when I arrived in Australia to teach here too, you know, that sort of thing. Don't assume it's only for people whose English is not their first language. So Aussie expressions and everything.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a new environment, and so it's just making them comfortable and aware of what's in that environment, right? And guiding it, because it can be so overwhelming.
I can send you what I like the draft list of questions and stuff if you like, so you can adapt them to whatever way you like.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and I think, you know, linking that back to what they're used to as well, and their exposure, they're not used to having to find that information for themselves. They're used to being given all the information they need. Yeah. And so while we want to help them develop the skills to find the information, I think it's more of a staggered approach as opposed to a jump in the deep end. Yeah. So yeah. It is a process, and it's not something that will happen just because they've enrolled.
It is definitely different. So the domestic students, they just went off, but yeah, the international ones, I specifically did like a Google, like shared the screen and showed them how it's functioned. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just want to comment a bit about that. I mean, considering when you talk about independent learning, from my experience in my education systems, yeah, I would say that we do have like kind of spoon-fed. So it's just a matter like we don't get used to, you know, try to find information ourselves and then try to reflect on ourselves, you know, and all this kind of thing is, yeah, to me, I think the international, maybe if at this point they feel like quite overwhelmed and they have to go around and find all the information, whereas normally what we have back home is just like everything will be fit on you. And you know, I know it's somehow it's good and bad, but yeah, it's just kind of transition period that they need to understand that they are now in, you know, mature level, they're in university, so they have to change their approach. It's more on try to look all the information themselves, try to educate them. They need to know what are the right information that they have to get it. And especially they need to keep on asking. The thing is they're, you know, they just always keep in to themselves. That's a problem, I see.
Yeah. And that's creating that atmosphere where they feel safe that they can ask that question and they're not going to be penalized for it or looked down upon. It's okay. Yeah, and so creating that atmosphere where they feel comfortable with that goes a long way.
They just always feel that if I ask these questions might be wrong, and then people will laugh at me, and then maybe definitely about the communication skill as well. So that's another barrier. They're just afraid to ask. They prefer to email personally. So this kind of thing, we have to encourage them to. I agree that you need to try to set some talking about what's your experience back home, what, you know, the cultural thing need to be included so they feel more comfortable and they start to adapt, that the environment here is more open compared to back home. Like we are more like, as Natalia mentioned, it's more hierarchical. So it's just like, we are more listening rather than talking. So we'll take all the information rather than questioning. So we never say, ask why, but we just take it as yes.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity to educate and expose others as well to that, like especially now where our students don't have a lot of opportunities to travel overseas and get different viewpoints and different experiences. So making them aware of it in the classroom as much as possible, I think is very valuable, particularly now, you know.
Our online ones, we've got a handful of domestic students that are in the online class with the 40 international students, and they too are struggling because they sort of had some comments saying that they're having a hard time engaging with the international students. And so even having that conversation with those particular students think about it from their point of view, and trying to be more understanding and empathetic and, you know, helping and guiding them and informing them and things like that. So, I found that trying to sort of, help the domestic students also understand the cultural barriers is obviously very useful for them.
And if anyone wants any other ideas on how to embed some cultural activities in the sessions, short or long types of activities, feel free to get in touch. It's one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in, embedding kind of cross-cultural and intercultural opportunities into classes and into activities. So you have my email. If not, I'll pop it here, but feel free to send me an email. We can discuss it further. I will, just aware of the time, I'll send Roger, just because I can't seem to transfer the file from Drive through the chat. So Roger, if it's okay, I'll send you a PDF of the slides, and then if you can send it out to everyone. But it's been a pleasure, and yeah, I wish you luck with supporting your EAL students. But do get in touch if you have any questions, or you want to discuss anything further, or if you like talk about any other ideas on intercultural communication.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks very much. It's great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you all.
Bye.
Bye.
So.
Yeah.